to beautiful Kate speaking on, what was it?
Growing Aroids in hydroculture. Thank you, Sam. I will be sitting down occasionally in case you hadn't noticed my delightful footwear. I broke my ankle 2 months ago. So, for those who don't know me, I'm Kate. Hi. I have been growing Aroids probably for 7 or 8 years now, and started dipping my toe in the hydro pool probably 3 or 4 years ago. I am on Instagram as Kate and Finn versus Plants, and I predominantly grow hydroculture. For those who don't know, Finn is actually my 5-year-old, because everyone kind of, yeah. So when I started out, I was very much learning a lot from Nigel Rannard, who a lot of you might know of, who is Urban Green, was one of the pioneers of hydroculture. He tends to work a lot with automated systems like flood and drain, and that's what I originally learned, but I also learned that I don't have time for all of that. So this is subtitled Hydro for Lazy Growers as well. So my idea of hydro is making sure that this is as low maintenance as I can possibly make it, because I got other things to do. All right, so let's talk about hydroculture and what it is. So we're going to talk about chemistry basics as well. I will not make it a chemistry class. So I've tried to make it as simple as possible, but you do need to know the basics. Then we'll cover some media, which I've brought in examples for if you want to have a feel of them later. We'll talk about passive versus active growing, and then how to transition. Can we turn a light maybe a little bit more on? And then we'll talk about transitioning seeds, cuttings, established plants, etc. Are we able to turn the light up a little bit, because I have lots of stuff to show people? All right, thanks, Annie. So, hydroculture. You will get a copy of this presentation as well emailed to you, so don't stress if you can't see it so well. So, hydroculture, first and foremost, is soilless growing. All of you, I dare say, will be growing some sort of hydroculture. The differentiation between hydroculture and hydroponics is water-based. So water is what's delivering the nutrients to you. So when we talk about passive and automated, so passive is what most people refer to as semi-hydro. Just so you know, to hydro growers, the term semi-hydro is like hearing someone say monsteria. You just kind of do it. So it's not semi-hydro because it has no soil. It's full hydro. It's just that it's passive because it doesn't use any moving parts. Active systems are more so what you associate with hydroculture and hydroponics. So those are your flood and drain trays, your aqua pumps, your air stones, etc. So yeah, all of you are probably hydroculturists without realising it. So we're there already. Chemistry. It's not the most exciting topic, but it is really necessary to have a good foundation understanding before you start growing in hydroculture, because everything goes wrong if one of these things is out. But what I'm hopefully going to help you work out is how to cover your mistakes a little bit easier, so that you don't have to be monitoring everything really, really closely. So I want you to think about these 3 arms of chemistry as basically a nutrient to plant business. So you're selling your nutrients to your plants. The first is CEC, which is cation exchange capacity. This is the exchange of positive or negative ions. And this is where your nutrients are. Your nutrients are ions. So that's basically the investment stage of the whole chain. Then we move into electronic conductivity. Some of you might know it as parts per million. This is the sales. So I'll go into what all of these mean. But then there's pH as well. All of you know pH, I'm presuming, and that's your distribution. So let's talk a little bit more about that. So first up, cation exchange capacity. So this is your investment. The easy way to kind of remember this, I find, is cats and onions. Really, really simple. So your cats are your cation exchange capacity. So this is where you will get things releasing positive ions. This is where things like magnesium are carried. So this is what will feed your plants. In a high cation exchange capacity. The way it works is that nutrients within the water will get absorbed into the media, and the media will release the nutrients as the plant requires it, whereas not the water. Whereas the anion, which is the negative ion release, that's the onions, that is generally going to be, it won't hold on to any nutrients in the media that you're growing. So that's where you would be feeding more regularly. And that's where media like that is going to be better for your active systems, where you're going to be flooding and draining or drip feeding, et cetera, et cetera. So cats kind of take care of themselves, and onions turn the waterworks on. It's an easy way to remember it. In terms of your cat media, so soil, believe it or not, is a high CEC. So once you know that, you can kind of start transferring it over to non-organic and soilless media. So cocoa fibre is really high CEC. Perlite, vermiculite, pumice, zeolite. You have contact with most of these materials in terms of things like MAB, which a lot of people use, and a lot of it's in potting mix as well. So zeolite, for example, is the main ingredient and wetting agent in potting mixes. So we all use these already. It's just working them a different way. In terms of the anions, so your onions, that's when you're talking about leca, perlite, sand, and any other ceramic or clay balls. These don't hold nutrients, so you have to be able to have it constantly supplied to them. However, they generally have a good air porosity, which we'll cover as well. So yes, electrical conductivity, so parts per million, as I was saying. Now this is the supply to meet demand. So EC is how you work out how much your plant needs. So what it will do is in EC, I've written it down beautifully, so let me just get this. So for your EC, this is basically your sales section. So they'll control how many nutrients are available to plants, and it avoids over-fertilisation. So we all know that principle as well. As a general rule, tap water that comes out, like when you measure your pH in your water, you need to know your starting point. Tap water generally starts at 0, so there's no need to measure it, unless you're running off bore water or things like that, which most people aren't. So Aroids tend to prefer an EC of 0.7 to 1.0. I try to keep towards the 0.7 because that way you're not going to burn anything, and you'll see if they need more. And keeping in mind, you're going to be having water evaporate or get absorbed, which means your EC is going to be increasing anyway. So that means that all of those remaining nutrients that aren't uptaken, they're going to sit behind. So if you start at the high end, it's going to end up way too high and you'll get nutrient lockout. When you're measuring EC, which a lot of people do forget to do, it's okay with a lot of those buffered materials, so your high CECs. But when you're talking about big reservoirs of water, it's really important to know this. So in terms of, there's 2 ways to measure it. So there's truncheons, which these are really, really low tech. You just dip them in the water and it will flash up the lights as to where your EC is. Just to give you an idea on this, that, where my thumb is where you want your EC for Aroids. This is how much it could possibly go up to. So you don't just chuck more nutrients in thinking that you'll be feeding them for longer. It's not how it works. The concentration goes up as the water level goes down. So that's why it's good to start at the lower end of it. And this is an automatic one. These are much more accurate. You can set them to parts per million, EC. They're not that expensive. They're much more expensive, obviously, than a truncheon. If you just want to start out, start with a truncheon. And then if you do have an EC meter, you need to have an EC probe reset, basically. So this resets it to 0 and cleans it, etc., etc. So the last one is pH. So I'm presuming everyone remembers pH from chemistry, or if you've kept fish, same principle. So this is the potential hydrogen that's within the media. I will be sending out a copy of this so you can have a look, but if you want to have a look at this chart so that you can see what's available at what level, you can simply type in hydroponic pH availability, and you'll be able to see. So there are different nutrients that will be available at different pH levels. So this is basically your delivery of your nutrients to your plant. Generally with most Aroids, it's 5.5 to 6.5. So they like it on the sweeter side. However, if you look up what's the best pH for growing plants in hydroculture online, you're generally going to get, say, marijuana, lettuce, tomatoes, chilies, and they're much higher. So keep that in mind. Same with EC. EC for Aroids is much lower, pH is much lower as well. So the different newts are absorbed at different pH levels. I prefer sticking to a 5.8 just because that kind of covers everything. When you're growing big leafy plants in big systems, it's always a good idea, and I don't know whether you can see it, but where there's the cal and the mag, you see they kind of finish just around 6. So a lot of growers will supplement cal mag. Most of the time you won't need to unless you're growing really, really big plants though. So low pH, if you start getting low pH, drops from where you're setting it and it's dropping a lot, it's usually from decaying organic matter. Growing media. Once again, you can come and ask and have a look at what does what on all of these. But when you're looking at selecting your right media for your system, you've got to consider the cation exchange capacity, the air-filled porosity, and the water holding capability of it all. And then also physical size. If you're using active systems, you can't use small media because you will get clogged pipes, and you might, for example, flood your tent occasionally. Not that I've ever done that. So a lot of the ones you will really be familiar with or you'll be using. So leca, that's what most people associate with hydro. I don't like that for a passive system because it doesn't wick as well. It has basically 0 COC, so it's an anion. However, it's brilliant in recirculating systems that are constantly being fed a steady supply of nutrients or regular supply of nutrients. So that's your best option, and yet everyone uses it for passive. Vermiculite, everyone knows vermiculite as well. Vermiculite, because it's light, it holds a lot of water. It does eventually compact down, but it's a good amendment when you're mixing up your water through, so you run through mixers, because it can add a good water retention to things. Where am I up to? Perlite. Everyone knows perlite. Now this is generally, once again, good for supplementing and adding air. It's not got a CAC, so long term it's not a great option just for passive growing. You need to be able to flush it through. So using these in, say, a glass to propagate, it's fine, but once you get those roots happening, for the health of the plant moving forward, move it out of the perlite. And then let's do the ones that you generally are going to get from specialist growers. So the first one is zeolite. I've been using zeolite for, I'm going to go 2.5, maybe 3 years. So this is a high cation exchange capacity. It tends to wick very well, it has a high oxygen exchange rate, and it's a lovely buffering material. So it works really, really well as a passive mix. It's also part of both both the pre-made passive mixes, which I'll talk about later. The other one is pumice. Once again, a lot of people already use pumice as an amendment instead of perlite because it has a little bit more weight. However, it has a cation exchange capacity, whereas perlite doesn't. It also is great at aerating. However, it's good to be adding into plants that grow in, not necessarily so pertaining to Aroids, but into places like limestone growers. So a lot of begonia growers use a lot of this. Then we have the cacti and bonsai group of medias. So akadama, which a lot of people are starting to use. Akadama is a good amendment because it holds a lot of water. So if you do have plants that you're not going to be watering a lot, you can adjust your mixes so that you do have a little bit more availability of water, high CSE, and really good oxygen air-filled porosity. Now, the downside of this is that it does compact over time. So it's good to blend back with pumice, which doesn't break down. And that will give you a nice airy mix, and it's really good for seedlings, really good for even raising seeds and cuttings as well, because they're not heavy against the roots that way. Kanuma, which is this one. This is another bonsai and cacti medium. It's very, very light, really light. It generally holds its integrity for a couple of years. Once again, high CEC, really good wicking capacity, and that can be blended in as well. All right, so when you're looking at these, you need to consider the availability of what you can get, firstly. The air-filled porosity, so how much oxygen it's going to hold. Do you need to be supplementing it? Do you need to be flushing it constantly? Is it, your CEC and then your water holding capacity. So can it wick? If it's going to be in a passive system, can it wick? Or does it need regular watering? Next one. And then there's your pre-mixed passive media. I must clarify passive because these are far too small to be used in active systems. So I have an example. Most people know MAB. There's 2 grades of MAB. This is what Scott from Dr. Green Thumbs was using for cacti, and I was buying the zeolite and the pumice from him separately and mixing them. And then he decided that was probably an easy way to sell more of his mineral oil aeration blend by renaming it MAB. The other pre-mixed one is Gritty Mix. So this is from Mineral Land. This has a lot of different minerals in it in terms of there's mayfan, there's kanuma, there's green zeolite, there's quite a lot in here, scoria. So this, all of these tend to have a certain natural release of nutrients anyway. So not your macronutrients, but you'll get a little bit of a boost from these just if you feel like not necessarily feeding them every time you water. Yeah. One thing I will say in terms of things like your high CEC media though, when you're looking at those and you're using them in passive hydroculture, is that because they hold on to those nutrients, if you water it with nutrients every single time you water, you are going to end up over-fertilising your plant. So that sounds like a bad thing, but it's a good thing because you only have to fertilise once every 3 waterings, and the rest of the time you just dump water on it. So it's much easier if you work with that kind of idea. As long as you know that, it makes it easy. All right. So passive growing. Let's talk about some different ways of passive growing. So first one would be medialess, which we've all used for cuttings, for example, just popping it in some water. Then there's water through. That's generally what you would be doing when you've got something like that with some MAB in it and you water it through so it runs to waste. Okay? Then what's there? So pot in pot. Pot in pot is where you have literally a pot and you put it in something that'll hold the water in it. Okay? Then you've got pot in tray. So that's when you would use a big community tray, fill it with pots. Yep. You've got a bigger reservoir of water that way as well. I'll talk about all of that. Then what have I got? I don't know. Closed vessels. Ugh, don't use closed vessels. They're the most horrible things ever. You cannot flush anything. You will get nutrient buildup. There are some plants that will survive in it, like devil's ivy, but you're not going to be able to grow anything long term unless you can flush, because it's just, you're going to get buildup of nutrients, you're going to get salts accumulating, you're going to get stagnant water. Even if you put an air stone in it, there's only so much you can do for so long. So I'm not a huge fan of just closed containers. There is another one which is called the Kratky method. It's very similar to a system I'm about to show you how you could build at home, which is an active system. The Kratky, I haven't tried it yet, so I'm not going to talk too much about it. I'll kind of touch on it when I show you this system. But from what I've been reading, it looks like a really good option of how to grow anthurium seeds. and apparently it works really, really quickly and really well. So I'm not going to recommend that yet, because most people who have been using this, I know that Jess was saying that she's been speaking to some growers who have tried it. Eric, yeah. However, it's mainly used for high nitrogen crops, so like lettuce. But we'll give it a try, because I've got some new clary seeds about to pop in the next couple of weeks, and they'll be a bit bigger. So they'll be a good thing to try. Now, air stones. Air stones in passive media. So this is a big one. So air stones, when you're talking about passive media, you do need to make sure that, let's use one of these. So when you're putting something into passive media, and I'm presuming we've all got these clear pots from Bunnings, they have a nice little line on them, which I'm sure you may or may not notice. There's a nice little line. Fill your media up to that line, then put your roots above that line. And never put water above that line. Because if you put water above that line, you are going to drown your passive plant, because there's not enough oxygen for it, particularly when it's transitioning from dirt to hydro. Now, if you put water above that line and drown it, and think I'll put an air stone in there to help it, it doesn't help it. All it does is moves the water around. For oxygen or an air stone to actually work, it's basically called deep water culture, and it needs to be about that deep. So if you want to do that with a passive tray and you're using passive systems, then stick it on top of an upturned pot so that it's sitting slightly out of the water. You'll still get the advantage of the oxygen. It's not going to hurt putting an air stone in your passive tray, but it's not going to benefit you. It's not going to move the water around. It's probably going to stop it from becoming stagnant, but it's not going to oxygenate the entire tray and be of use. So just make it deeper and raise the pots up if you're going to do that. Does that make sense? I hope so. All right, no, back a bit. Where are we? So yeah, that's air stone. Let me see if there was anything else. Most of it's about rigs. La la la. All right, the other one, so passive is also called wicking. A lot of people know wick watering from growing African violets. You can apply the same principle, but once again, use one that has a good water holding capacity that'll draw it up. So cocoa-based mixes are good for that. When I'm talking about mixing things for your hydro, it's the same principles as mixing up your own Aroid mix with soils and orchid barks and perlite. You can also use medialess systems that you literally suspend over water. So that's what you would be calling nutrient film technique, which a lot of people use for seedlings. It's not great for bigger plants, but it's certainly good for seedlings because it will give them a constant supply of nutrients, oxygen, water. And the other one is cloners, which I think a lot of you would have seen cloners, where the water and nutrients spray in from underneath and the roots are suspended over a humid box. I personally I don't like aeroponics or cloners. For Aroids, some of them it works well, others it doesn't. I don't think it's a good blanket kind of rig to be looking at, because I've had really good successes and some really bad failures through all of this. So I tend to prefer to root things in either an active system using leca or in passive systems as well. Then deep water culture. I love deep water culture. It is the simplest thing in the world that you can possibly do. So, for example, let's talk prefab deep water culture. It's a bucket with a net pot and you put an air stone in it, and that's it. So the idea is we were going to try and take a photo of the noodles. There's Ray from a Plantment up in Sydney has a really good photo of deep water culture noodles. And I think, Diane, you saw the noodles of one of my DWC. They hang down to here. And they're super healthy and juicy and white, and it is honestly the easiest way to set up an active hydroculture system. So you literally just get an aquarium pump, some airline, preferably black so it doesn't get algae in it, hook them up, put an air stone on it, chuck it in. Now, the advantage of these is that you have constantly oxygenated water, so there's never a cut-off. You literally use lacquer in the top of this just to keep it anchored. The lacquer isn't used to hold media, it doesn't get poured anything, it doesn't get used to hold nutrients, and it doesn't have water poured over it. It's literally the roots living in a humid environment and having oxygen supplied to them. It's mobile, it's light, it's really easy, and these are cheap as well. The downside of it is you have to be conscious of checking things, so it can run low very quickly. You get used to the sound of it when the air stone and the water level gets low. You hear the sound of the air stone. But I generally tend to use this for really big specimens, which I think I've got some examples later I'll go through with you. And then I've got an example of how you can make one yourself at home. And then flood and drain. So this is the gold standard in hydroculture. It is literally, I'll go through it later with you, I've got pictures there, but it's literally a tub with a pump, and it fills a tray, and then it drains a tray, and you have that on a timer. And then there's drip irrigation, which is probably what I use the most of, and I've got a few systems here that I can show you, and then I've got some examples of what I've done for each. All right, so let's go through these ones. Deep water culture. You can see over on the left there how they're set up. So this is where I've got my maximum. I've got the Corsinianum. I've got monsteras in them. It's the only place I can keep monsteras. Quite a few anthuriums. What else have I got? A giant Paraíso, which is about yay big now. There's a lot. Veru. Lots of different things. The big ones, basically, who space hog in community tanks and crowd everything else out. I can move them this way and I can change the location, and it's really simple. I don't have to find a new plug to plug anything into. So I showed you the bucket. Now, on the right in the picture there is, I don't know if everyone's seen it, but I built a hydro terrarium cabinet, so the IKEA greenhouse kind of things. I built one of those almost 2 years ago now. So it's completely soilless, but down the bottom there is a DIY deep water culture setup. So anything growing in the bottom is growing in deep water culture. So to make, this is basically what I did for these, to make this. This is just in a much bigger scale. So there is a reservoir. You have a reservoir. You have an air stone in there and a pump running into it. You can then use either a lid and then get out, I love this thing, your step drill and get it to the right size to put pots into it, or you can get your hole saws and basically make them the right size so that your pots hang into them, and then keep your water level at just at the base of the pot, and then as the water level drops down, you should see the roots hanging into it. So the idea is to keep the pots above the water line all the time. Another easy way you can do it is literally using one of these nursery pot holders, because it's literally stick the pots in and they will grow through as long as you use net pots. So stuff like those. If you can get the right size, they're the best things to do. Alternatively, port pots, which are used by orchid growers quite a lot. So yes, that's super simple. Anybody can do that at home if you've got a tub and an air stone, basically. All right, so next one. So flood and drain. So I haven't got my flood and drain system in here because it's obviously quite bulky. It's more advanced in terms of building it. It can be done as long as you have Nige come down to your house and build it over a long weekend. It's really simple to do. So there's a little video so I can show you through if you can see it.
I don't think it wants to play.
Amazing. So basically, let's try and imagine. So if you can see in the picture there, there's a tray at the top. This is a very old photo because this was when you could actually see it. So there's a tray at the top. Below that there is an intake hose, which the nutrient solution from the tub below gets pumped up. There's an overflow valve on the drainage hose, and that's where it all comes back out again. Overflow is the main point there. You don't want it flooding anywhere else but in the tray. So what happens is mine goes on for 5 minutes every 2 hours. It doesn't need to be that much, but that's what I still have it at. It's fine. The advantages of this, once again, is that you're getting a good supply of nutrients and then letting them drain. Good supply of nutrients and never letting them dry out either. While it is the gold standard, I am not the biggest fan, believe it or not. So I have issues with the top tray because I don't grow things that crowd everything else out in that tray. I can get algae buildup on the bottom of the tray because it's constantly got a little bit of water left so that the pots are sitting out of any leftover water. So that's one drawback. I have to run Oxy Plus through it every 6 months just to nuke it basically. The other disadvantage of something like this is if you've got climbing aroids, trying to come up with a way that you don't get them tipping over. So one thing I've done, and I do like doing this is acoustic soundboard. You can get it in big sheets from Bunnings and it's super cheap and it's really light. And then you can fix it into either a net pot or an anti-spiral or whatever pot you want to be using. Attach it on, and that works really well. I've grown dubia on this. What else have I got? Epipremnum variegata. But I use this for shinglers as well. Now, shinglers with a lot of kind of little fine roots don't tend to just attach onto this like they would on a tree. So what I do, once again, to the sound department, this is speaker fabric. So it's used in terrariums quite a lot. What's it called? It's Hydrolon, yeah. It's speaker fabric. But this has, they just charge more for it because they call it Hydrolon. So this is, you can get this on eBay. You've just got to be mindful about picking the right one. Once again, it's up here if you want to have a look. This is good for your really fine-rooted shinglers because it gives it something to dig into and it's still quite light. That can be used in passive, it can be used in anything. I use it in quite a few different systems just because it's so simple and you can cut it and extend it and it's, yeah. So that's flood and drain. If you have any specific questions about it, I can answer like how it's made up and like it's the more expensive one to set up. And if you've got the space, they are good. But yeah, once again, not so much the lazy person's hydro first stop. All right. Now, drip irrigation. This is what I use the most of. So drip irrigation is really easy to set up yourself. So drip irrigation is basically a pump that pumps a nutrient solution up a hose like this and then through smaller hoses that you've attached and they go directly into the pots and they deliver nutrient solution that's oxygenated and runs through. So something like this fits onto, come up once again and have a look if you want to have a closer look. So this is a prefabbed drip irrigation system. It fits net pots and it fits anti-spiral pots in here. I will make a suggestion in terms of pots that whenever you can use these, the anti-spirals, they are much better for your plants. You will get much bigger plants out of it. And as Hayley knows, you then don't have to cut all of the roots out of goddamn holes that the net pots have. So once again, these are good for passive because they allow oxygen. These are good for active systems because they will hold leca. They're open at the bottom. Roots can come out. You literally cut the roots off because it's designed to air prune. And it's also open so that if you're having water going through them constantly, you're not actually allowing it to get too wet. You've still got oxygen exchange coming in. One of the other advantages of using drip irrigation, which it doesn't work with anything else, is that you can actually irrigate the top of your poles. So instead of running it into the pot, you run it to the top of the pole. If you do that, make sure that your poles are secured to something from the top, or you'll do the fun thing that I kind of do every couple of months and one of them will fall over and the whole tent will flood. Within about an hour, it'll drain the, yeah. That never happened, and you never heard me say it. However, that once again, you'll get a really good attachment into your poles, really big leaf growth to the point of annoying. What else can we talk about? Yeah, so let's talk about transitioning. So seeds and cuttings. So I always start my seeds in hydroculture, so of cocoa blend or akadama blend, or the Kratky method, as I said, which I'm going to find out more about. I will put it in my highlights if you do follow me on Instagram, or if you want to come and talk to me about it, all good. And I will put a link up on the PowerPoint that gets emailed out to you for a good source to research other hydroculture stuff. I'm trying not to tell you stuff that you could necessarily Google. It's just more about what lazy people like to do. So I just find that, think about what you want to move things into. So for example, for a anthurium seed, I'll start it off in something quite light, so like a cocoa blend, until it takes off. Then I'll move it into something like, say, MAB or Gritty Mix or Zeolite. And then as that grows, the transition into leca is much easier. I don't have to pick things off roots. It's all fine. Nothing gets polluted. I don't get flooded with organic matter in my trays. Cuttings. So you really just need to ensure they're cut. The cuts are calloused and sealed. I use steri prune. Other people use other stuff, but I do prefer using steri prune because it really does. It's not going to wash off. It's not going to pull off. And then you literally stick it in the media in which you are going to use. I find that this is better than starting it in water and then transitioning it. Just start it in whatever you're going to do it in. It's just less work. And you don't have dirt roots on it generally either, so there's none of that transition shock. And so growth hormones or feeding when it comes to seeds and cuttings. So generally, as you all know, there's nutrients in the seed when they start. You don't need to be feeding them, but using a growth hormone is good. And cuttings-wise, what I generally do is I'll use CCS as an anti-stress to water it in, and then it just goes into one of the rigs if it's an active grower that I'm going to be rooting in one of the systems, and they're fine. So as long as that's applied, you don't, yeah. All right, next one. So established plants. These are harder to do because they obviously have an established dirt root system. So a couple of things that you need to do. The first one is clean it. So get an old toothbrush, that's what I use, under the sink in a bucket, give it a good scrub, gently, and then let it soak. So I generally let them soak overnight in a bucket of CCS. Anti-stress treatment also helps with the roots. And then I clean it again. Then what you do is, as I explained earlier, media up to your line. If you don't have a line on your pot, just draw one on. Media up to the line, roots in, backfill, and then water no higher than that. Water it through from the top if you're doing passive, because capillary action means that you need the oxygen going through, the water going through in order to pull up nutrients from the bottom. And then once you've done all of that, a month later, pull it out, check the roots, get rid of anything that's dying off, because those are the dirt roots that will cause a pH drop. Yeah? Cool. That's it. So, I've got a whole heap of equipment up here if you would like to come and have a look. That is a very brief crash course with hopefully enough information that you got a bit of idea of what is behind hydro. If you want to come and have a play with anything, please feel free afterwards. But in the meantime, are there any questions about anything? Feel free, if you don't feel like talking in these environments and you have specific questions, come and have a chat to me. I'm floating around. I've got a whole heap of stuff that I can show you and explain how things are put together. So I'm more than happy. How you doing?
Oh, hi. Inquiring about begonias,
Yeah.
the rhizome itself on the root at the bottom, I put one in water,
Yeah.
completely in water.
Yeah.
It was a closed container.
Yeah.
And I was using outside rainwater, which wasn't a good idea.
Yeah.
It was infested with blah, blah, blah. But,
Yeah.
it started to actually grow, and I see the roots coming out. It was growing well.
Yeah.
Could it still sufficiently grow in there? Or?
Ideally not. Long term not. I mean, I guess if you want to do questions about begonias, feel free to DM me. We'll try and stick to Aroids tonight, but there's really easy ways that you could do it by using Akadama and pumice. And it's simple. You don't need to feed them a lot, but they need that oxygen and free draining to keep going longer.
It was just mainly an experiment.
Yeah. Yeah. And look, you can chuck anything in water. You can always throw stuff in water and see how it goes. But yeah, for longevity and for hydro growing, this is kind of, yeah. There's easy ways to do things without it just being water and being really easy on you as well as the plant. So, I don't know. We can talk more about it if you want to have a chat about begonias later. Hi.
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 Wise, like for Akadama and more of the like not so, I don't know what it's called, like mainstream media.
Yeah.
Where is the easiest place to get them?
So for a lot of these are, you can get things like zeolite, pumice, mab, obviously. Sam can probably get it from Scott up at Dr. GT for you if you want to be able to do that. However, cacti and succulent and bonsai growers. So I get my special stuff like Akadama, Kanuma, etc. From a place called Andy Succulents, but they're all distributed by Mineral Land. So if you just go to the Mineral Land website, they have a list of stockists. You can just contact them. They're usually smaller operators. You go to their house and they operate out of their garage. So they're really happy to have a chat to you. Sometimes for a wee bit too long when you've got a full day. But yeah, they're always lovely people. And they're always very passionate about their stuff as well. So that's a lot of stuff you can get from hydro stores, a lot of stuff you've got to kind of do the legwork and you can't get it. Yeah. Yeah. You stuck your hand up, or is it just for Sam?
I was just going to ask you regarding sourcing the flood and drain and the equipment.
Okay. Hydro stores. Find a hydro store and make it your friend. Those guys generally know nothing about growing ornamentals. So it's very hard.
Flowers are nice.
Yeah. So if you go, because my hydro guys constantly ask me questions when I go in there, because they're getting more and more people coming in asking about growing ornamentals, and that's not their jam. But as long as you, once again, if you know someone who grows ornamentals in hydro and you want to get an idea of what you need, hit them up and ask. Be nice about it, don't be pushy, and please say thank you at the end. That's always a big one, saying thank you at the end. But everything I generally get is from Epping Hydro, but most hydro stores all have the same stuff. The Platinium, which is the prefabbed drip system, I don't know if they're still available anymore. It's a French company and I think they stopped importing them. But once again, that is from like tubs from Bunnings. The nursery trays you can generally get from orchid growers. So I think Orchids Are Us or Orchid Den or something like that. Hose, hydro stores, the connectors and elbows and T-pieces, hydro stores, even aquarium stores very often have this stuff. And it's just investigating. There's some random stuff that I use that isn't used by hydro growers normally, like these. And it's just working out what you can substitute stuff for and where to find it. But get creative. Once you know the basics of how to do it, I built my vertical wall, which is designed for my anthuriums, and that has a tub from Bunnings, which I got my step drill out for, has an aquarium pump, pumps up 2 metres through a hose, and then drips through and goes on 3 times a day for 30 seconds and feeds the plants, and they do really well until so many noodles. And I had to make a net pot to fit inside them. So there's no rules about how you can grow. It's what's going to work for you and how creative you can get, I guess. I've made some stuff out of weird things, so yeah.